Now we're going to begin Chapter 8, Lesson 6. Some of you are thinking, what about Lesson 5? Well, I'm skipping it. Pretty easy, pretty simple. It's kind of like when we got to 8.4 yesterday, you said, what about 8.3? Skipped it. Why? It was just a little bit of extra work and a little bit of busy work that most of you are going to get confused on compared to building a better understanding. Please trust me when I tell you I understand mathematics, and I understand brains that don't understand mathematics. My brain didn't understand reading, and I had to learn how to read when I was an older student. Most of you, that was one of the very first things that you learned how to do. So when I tell you that this lesson is really confusing, I promise you, 8.5 and 8.3, they're confusing. A couple of you would get it, but the majority of you would be thrown off instead of just teaching it the straightforward mathematical way. Now, once again, I don't use all the terms that they do. I do use some different terms, or just don't even have a term for it, like the inverse properties. But I tell you, opposite function on the opposite side. Yesterday, we had a lesson, opposite function on the opposite side, with addition and subtraction. I did the video. Afterwards, I had several of you tell me, well, yeah, I don't remember this. And I went back and looked. Yesterday's video was the 5th video that I talked about the opposite function on the opposite side, and I worked problems for you. So when you come back to me and you say, I watched the video, I took notes, and I say, okay, so what are the 2 steps? And you go, I have no idea. Well, then we got some problems. Okay? So, yes, I understand you can hear me. I understand you can look at me and you can write down exactly what I do. I also understand that you can be thinking about 40,000 other things other than what I'm saying. From the day one that you walked into my classroom, I said you have to listen. And listening is your ears working and your brain engaged. I promise you, I'm teaching you. I'm not here just to make a video because I like looking at my video and hearing my voice when you don't bring your earplugs to class. No, I despise it. This is the way things are going to go. You're going to be watching videos from this point forward. How do I know that? I'm not making it up, I promise. I am 46 years old. I am almost 47. This is my 21st year of teaching. And for the past 5 or 6 years, I've been watching videos during my staff meetings. Here, we're going to watch this video. I'm not complaining because when I watch the video, I'm learning from it. There are days I struggle with my focus, and especially after I've been here for 12 hours and I'm trying to listen and pay attention, I take notes, I follow along, and I re-engage my brain when I figure out that I've got that distracting voice pulling me away. Same thing I've asked for you. We have to persevere. We have to learn to move forward and to do our best no matter what. For some of you, math is tough. I get it. I honestly do. I understand. But there are just things in life that are tough. Some of us, we remember math easily. My brain, it's a math brain. I get math, and I understand science as well. Now, if you ask me about the social studies that I taught 3 years ago, you ask me about the social studies classes that I took in college, or in high school, or in junior high, I'm a blank. I don't remember it. I have to go look it up. But if it's a question you're going to ask me and you really need my help, if it's a morning like this morning, Mrs. Ross is not there, and you need my help in social studies, I'm going to persevere. I'm going to help you out. I'm going to look it up. When you come to me like yesterday where there was a question about a coefficient, and I said, okay, what's a coefficient? Did you look it up? No. Why not? Okay, laziness doesn't get us anywhere in life. Every time I've tried to take the lazy way out, it has backfired on me, and I've taken 4 steps back in life instead of moving forward. It's a life lesson, my friends. Don't be lazy. Put forth the effort. Persevere, as the sign says up here on my board. Be determined to go forward and learn. If you have a question on the next day's mid-chapter checkpoint about a definition of such as coefficient, guess what I'm going to tell you? Nothing. I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to open up your glossary for you. You have the glossary. You will have the lessons for 8.6, 8.3, 8.3, 8.2, 8.1. All of the questions that we've worked from this point back to the beginning of chapter 8. Open your book, look at the practice questions, open my videos if you really don't remember a lesson. I'm not helping you on the first day. That is your chance to show me that you can get 100% and that you learned. After that, I'll pull you back every day for the next week if I need to get through that if you truly don't get it and understand. But what I'm going to ask you to do is bring your book to me. Let's sit down, let's look at the examples that I worked with you. You've got to make sure that you're getting your brain focused and engaged. Why do they take so long? Well, I've already talked for 5.5 minutes about how you need to learn and the effort you need to put forth, because there are life lessons. And there are other lessons that I put inside my videos that do make them a little longer. Could I just get up here and say, okay, we've got 9 questions here, we're going to work through them step by step, I'm going to show you, and then you need to just go do your homework? Sure. But even though it's quicker, it's not the most efficient way to teach you. How many of you, if I say, okay, how do I divide a decimal by a decimal or divide a whole number by a decimal, can quickly remember how to do that? There's about half of you that would remember how to do that. The other half that's remaining, they're going through and they're trying to process. There were letters. He taught us letters to remember how to do that with the decimals on the outside of the division box. And there's another quarter of you going, what? I've taught it to you multiple times. But when it's been a couple months and you don't remember, I put it on my video so it'll remind you. Because in our practice questions, we have work like we're going to see on our homework. I promise I'm trying to teach you the best that I possibly can, and all of you can be successful. So let's move forward and let's get into our lesson. Chapter 8.6, it says the division property of equality. Yesterday's assignment, it said the additive properties of equality, the subtraction properties of equality. Later we're going to see the multiplication properties of equality. Those are not terms that I use, but the definitions are right here, and descriptions and examples. The terms that I have used since the beginning of school that you have seen since you were in 3rd grade is the idea of fact families. That's one thing that I miss about Saxon math out of a handful of things. Go Math is a fantastic math program. I really like it. I believe it is better than Saxon math. There are a couple things that are missing. I teach fact families, and if you recall, since the first month of school I have talked about fact families. I still use fact families when I was helping my wife do her chemistry, advanced nursing, whatever math problem it was. I didn't know what all the abbreviations and chemical reactions and all that was. I looked at it as math. And I knew the ideas of fact families, and I knew that I had to do the opposite function on the opposite side. You have talked about fact families ever since you could do basic math. When they say that 4 plus 2 equals 6, then 2 plus what equals 6, you were able to say, well, that's 4, and we switched them. But it said also, well, if 4 plus 2 equals 6, then 6 minus what is 2, and you could say, well, it's minus 4. So you learned from an early age in 3rd grade that the opposite of addition was subtraction. And we had 4 problems that went together. And then you learned it in 4th grade. And then in 5th grade, they may have talked about it in a different way, but they still used it in the 5th grade math book. And since the first month of school in 6th grade, we've still talked about this. I have 4 that go together. 2 addition, 2 subtraction. When it's multiplication and division, I have 4 that go together. 2 multiplication, 2 division. It's always 3 sets of numbers. 3 times 4 is 12. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 divided by 3 is 4. 12 divided by 4 is 3. They are always grouped together. They just can go in different ways. One of the words that we see recently is the inverse properties or the inverse operations. And I had somebody ask me yesterday, well, what does that inverse word mean? That's a good question, because it's not a word that we use on a regular basis. If we look it up in the dictionary, if we persevere to figure out what it means, it says something that is the opposite or reverse of something else. So I'm switching. I'm going to have the opposite thing on the opposite side. It's going to go in opposite directions, right? So if I have the Eiffel Tower and I say, well, what is its inverse? It's going to be that. It's on the opposite side, it's upside down. It also would not be sturdy, and I would never stand under it. So we're talking about doing the opposite function on the opposite side once again, but this time with math, multiplication, and division. And yes, I've already taught this to you several videos ago, but we'll go back through it. So if I'm starting with multiplication with my variable, my letter that's in the math problem, then I'm going to do division to get rid of it and to find the answer. If I'm starting with division with my variable, then I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to multiply and then use it multiplication to find the answer. Example. Mia ran 14 laps around a track for a total of 4,200 meters. She's insane. The equation 14D equals 4,200 can be used to find the distance D in meters that she ran in each lap. Solve the equation and explain what the solution means. So when I set it all up, first I have to know the equation. Well, the equation's given to me, 14D equals 4,200. I have to know in my head that a coefficient, a number, with a variable, a letter, tells me that I'm multiplying. Definition of a coefficient, a number being multiplied by a variable. A variable is just a letter inside of a math problem. I know that that's going to be equal to 4,200. So that's when I have to know what the inverse, big fancy word, of multiplication is. I don't use the word inverse, do I? I use the word, well, what's the opposite? Well, if it's multiplication, I know I'm going to divide. So I do the opposite function first. The opposite function is to divide, that's what a fraction line means, by 14. And then I do it on the opposite side. So I divide it by 14 here, I divide by 14 here. Some of you prefer to put the line through, and some of you don't like to put the line through the cancellation. What that does is it just cancels out the 14s and D is by itself. Notice it says 1, because 14 over 14 is 1. When we borrowed the other 9 on our homework, and we had to, fraction that we had to carry over, we had 4/4, because we borrowed from the whole number, and when I borrow in fractions, I have to have a form of 1. And it had a denominator of 4, so I know my numerator had to be 4. Had to be 4/4. If it's 14 over 14, then it's 1. And when I go to the identity property, which we talked about last week, if I multiply or divide by 1, it doesn't change it, I drop it off. So I'm just going to end up with D. When I do the math, 4,200 divided by 14, I have to know which one goes inside my division box, or which one that I type into my handy-dandy calculator first. In a division sentence, going across, the first number gets entered inside the box or entered into my calculator first. When it's in fraction form, the top number goes inside the box or goes inside the calculator first. 4,200 divided by 14, once again I drop the 1. When I divide it out, I get 14 goes into 42 3 times, and then when I have my zeros, I just bring them up. So I know that my answer is 300. What is 300? Well, D is 300, because that 1, because the identity property just drops off. The 1 came because the 14 over 14 canceled it out. That's the whole goal of these math problems. I have to get the letter by itself. I stress this over and over and over again because the second half of this chapter is inequalities, and I have to know to get the letter by itself. I stress that because in 7th grade, math is algebra, and you have to get the letter by itself. 8th grade, freshman year, algebra, algebra 2, trigonometry, it's all getting the letter by itself. So when I know that my substitute, or when I'm going to check it and I'm going to substitute what I found, if I found that D is equal to 300 and I want to check my work, then I'm going to substitute the 300 back into the original math problem. It tells me that it's 14D and D is 300. So I take 14 times 300 and then I check on my handy dandy calculator, 14 times 300, it does indeed give me 4,200. I know my answer is correct, so that means, the second step was to explain what it means, that Mia ran 300 meters in each lap that she went around. Moving on. Example 1 in your book then. Make sure we're following along, paying attention, engaging our brains and our ears, and we're taking our notes to look back on during your mid-chapter checkpoint. Solve this equation. 2/3 n equals 1/4. What's the coefficient? Hopefully you thought 2/3. Hopefully you didn't go, 2/3 is my coefficient. A coefficient and a variable tells me I'm doing what? Multiplication. So if I'm going to multiply, then I know I'm going to do the opposite function on then the opposite side. So I start with the opposite function. I have 2/3 times n, so I'm going to divide by 2/3, which is what your book shows you in blue. Then I know I'm going to have to do it on the opposite side. Well, notice what I have here. I put 3/2, but I had 2/3. Why is that? Did we notice that things changed here? This became multiplication. So the book skipped some steps there, and I'm going to talk you through it. It's not going to be on my board, so hopefully you're truly paying attention to what I'm saying, and it'll help you remember what we're doing. When I have division of fractions, first thing I ask, can I divide fractions? I can't divide fractions. So I go through my 3 steps. I keep my first one. Division becomes multiplication. I flip my second fraction. Once again, that's called a reciprocal. Fraction flipped upside down. Reciprocal. So that's where 2/3 n times 3/2 comes from. They skip the whole step of showing you to change it. They're just assuming by now, after Christmas break, more than halfway through our book, you know that you can't divide fractions and then you got to change it. So I'm actually multiplying by 3/2, and now I do it on the opposite side, which is also multiplying by 3/2. Then I have my basic multiplication questions. Can I multiply fractions? Yes. How do I do it? Multiply across. So I would take 1 times 3, and I would take 4 times 2. I ended up with my numerator and denominator. Notice there isn't anything to cross reduce. 3 does not go into 4, 3 does not go into 2, 2 does not go into 1, 2 does not go into 3. There's nothing that I can cross reduce here. So it just ends up with a fraction of 3/8. So I know my answer is n is equal to 3/8. Second one, as I told you, it's going to say multiplication property of equality. It's just saying, hey, we're going to find the inverse. We're going to do the opposite function on the opposite side. But if you get a question on your mid-chapter checkpoint or even your test, you can go back to this book, go back to this box, and read what it says and even see an example on how to set it up and the steps to do. Or you can look at this example and see that I'm going to actually solve it with you. A biologist divides. Oh, biologist. Bio life. Ology, study of. Ist, a person that does it. So this is a person that studies biology. It's a tangent lesson right there for you. Divides a water sample equally among 8 test tubes. Each test tube contains 24.5 milliliters of water. Write and solve an equation to find the volume of the water sample. So I have to start with the equation. It says let V represent volume in milliliters. Alright? And what are they doing with it? Well, when I go back and I look, I divided equally among 8 test tubes. So I know I'm going to have V divided by 8. And then it's going to be equal to what? Well, it's going to be equal to 24.5 milliliters because it is that. So I know that that's going to be set up as my equation. Now I got to solve for my equation. What am I doing mathematically first? With my variable. Remember, that's where we start. We always go to the variable to start out. My variable, I see a line and a number under it. That's a fraction, so I know I'm dividing. So I have to do the opposite. The opposite of dividing by 8 is multiplying by 8. I know you all said it in your heads. So I'm going to do the opposite function. I'm going to multiply by 8, and then I'm going to do what? The opposite side. I'm going to have 8. It was interesting that I had the steps on the video yesterday, and several of you had questions. And I said, well, where are the steps shown in your book? They're not there. Why not? They're on my board. I'm showing you. It'll help you out. So these would cancel out the 8s, leaving V by itself. And I would just simply have 8 times 24.5. I would type those into my handy-dandy calculator. I show my math problem that I'm doing so I get credit. 24.5 is 196. So I know my volume is 196 somethings. Well, they've already given me my label on the answer line. Once again, please remember, if there's an answer line and I do all of this work and I get the correct answer, I even check it and I plug 196 in here for the V and I do divide by 8 and I get 24.5, but I don't put it on the I-step answer line, I don't get credit for a correct answer. No reason to do that. Make sure your answers go on the answer line. It is 196 milliliters. Going on to our practice problems. This one, a few more steps set up, and then we're going to work through the steps on each of these. So question 1, 25m equals 10. My coefficient, once again, is 2.5. And my variable is m. My constant, my number without anything, is a 10. I know that I'm multiplying because a coefficient and a variable means multiplication. So I'm going to do my opposite function. I'm going to divide by 2.5. Then I'm going to do what? Opposite side, right? 10 divided by 2.5. Where does the top number go? Inside my division box. I'm dividing by 2.5. And some of you remember exactly what to do. Some of you don't remember. That's the other half of the remaining group. What are those letters? Well, those letters are OOU. OOU stood for what? And some of you really need to clue in and make sure that we're learning these, because these are math from this point forward in your education career. So OOU, over, over, up. I cannot divide by a decimal, no matter if there's a decimal inside the box or not. This mathematic problem is impossible, so we have to change it to where I can do it. So we have the OOU steps. I'm going to move it over on the outside, I'm going to move it over on the inside, and then I'm going to move my decimal up so it stays in the right place. So I'm going to move it on the outside. I'm going to go to the inside. It's not there. A couple of you still try to put it right in front. I always put it where it would be on a whole number. The whole number is 10, so I know the decimal is at the back. Then I can move it. So I go over, add that 0 because there wasn't anything there, and then I move my decimal up. That gives me 100 divided by 25. There are 4 quarters in every dollar, so I know that it is 4. M is equal to 4 is my answer, and then I'm moving on. 3x equals 210. I'm not going to have my arrows anymore, but I'm still going to keep this up here. I'm going to do my opposite function. Then I'm going to do it on the opposite side. Then I'm going to do the math to find the work. Starting with 3x, a coefficient of 3, a variable of x, constant of 210. I have the equal sign, which though it tells me it is 210, but I have to solve. My opposite function. I am multiplying, so I'm going to divide. Once again, I don't divide by a 3x. I have to keep my variable where it is. That's the whole point of this lesson, and it's what you'll have to do from this point forward in your educational career. X by itself is gotten because I'm going to divide by 3. That would cancel it out. It would become 1. Identity property, I'll keep the 1 because it doesn't change x. So I'm just getting x by itself. Opposite side, 210 divided by 3. I write my division box, 210 divided by 3, type it into my handy calculator, and I see that it is equal to 70. So 3 goes in 21 7 times, 3 goes in 0 0 times. It is indeed 70. I can plug it in where the x is and take 3 times 70. I get 210 and check my work. I know that's the answer. So x is equal to 70, and I'm done. This is what we've been leading to all of these lessons, where we're writing equations and we're writing expressions. Now we have them and we solve for them. This one, the equal sign, is over here with the variable. Does not change my work at all. Still the same thing. Still a coefficient and a variable. I know that's multiplication. I'm going to start with my opposite function. My opposite function is to divide by 4. That cancels the 4's out. I'm done with them. I'm going to then do the opposite side. Dividing by 4. 2.8 divided by 4. Can I divide a decimal by a whole number? Yes, I just move my decimal up. So once I move my decimal up, I divide. 4 does not go into 2. If you want to put a 0, put a 0. You don't have to put a 0. I don't put a 0 because I don't say 0 and anything. 4 goes into 28 7 times. So I know my answer is 7/10 as a decimal, and I know that that's equal to my letter or my variable that's by itself. T is equal to, that should be 0.7. So now, on your assignment, I had some of you say, well, I put the letter followed by the answer, or I put the answer followed by the letter. It doesn't matter. So I switched that up purposely, but accidentally deleted the decimal. So you can see that I can have t is equal to 0.7, or I can have 0.7 is equal to t. The order for my answer does not matter. You won't get it wrong by me, by NWEA, by the I-step, nothing. Question 4, 1/3 times n equals 15. So 1/3, the opposite function, division. I'm going to divide 1/3 by 1/3. I leave my n, and that's equal to 15. So I'm doing my opposite function. But I got to do some math first before I go to the opposite side. Because if I don't, then I have two math problems I have to change. The first thing that should pop into our head, because we already reviewed it today, but we did it the first or two months of school. I can't divide fractions, so I have to change it. First, I keep my first one. Then, division becomes multiplication. Then, I flip my second fraction. So what we should see is what that does for me when I multiply a fraction by its reciprocal is it automatically equals 1. Any fraction multiplied by its reciprocal is 1. Any fraction divided by itself is 1, because it would set it up this way. The 3's would cancel out and I'd have 1 over 1 and 1 over 1. Or if I multiplied across, I'd have 3 over 3, and that is just 1. Just proving that gives us to what we want. We get n by itself. Now, I want to do that on the opposite side. So if that leaves me with n is equal to 15, then I know I'm going to multiply on the opposite side 3 over 1. 15 has to go over 1 because I'm multiplying a whole number by a fraction, and that tells me I have to put my whole number over 1. I cross reduce it if I can, which I can't. So how do I multiply fractions? I multiply across. I multiply 15 times 3, which is 45. 1 times 1, which is 1. It's just 45 by itself. So I know that n is equal to 45. That takes me down to question 5. Once again, a fraction as my coefficient, a variable of y, it's equal to 1/10. I can't keep that right where the variable is, so I have to do the opposite. So I'm going to take my 1/2. Instead of multiplying by 1/2, I'm going to divide by 1/2. So 1/2 divided by 1/2. That's the opposite function. But then, just like this one, I got to pause and I got to change it because I can't divide fractions. So I know I'm going to multiply by its reciprocal. I keep my first one. Division becomes multiplication. Flip my second fraction, so it becomes 2 over 1. So I end up with 1/2 times 2 over 1 equals y, or times y equals the 1/10. So the y and the 1/10 stay the same. Now that I know what I'm multiplying by, now I'm going to do it on the opposite side because these would just cancel out. Canceling them out. Once again, if you want to, put a line through them. Some of you want to erase. I would strongly advise not to erase because there are, when it comes to the ISTEP test, if you just erase stuff, they can't count it as showing work. I would just put a line through it so you know it's done, cancel it out, and I'm just left with my y. But I'm going to do it on the opposite side, which is step 2. I had multiplied by 2 over 1, so here I'm going to multiply by 2 over 1. Cross reduce if I can, or you could just multiply across. If I just multiply across, I end up with 2 over 10, but then I have to see that I can reduce that. And 2 goes into both of them. 2 goes into 2 once, and 2 goes into 10 5 times. If I cross reduce, 2 goes into 2 once, and 2 goes into 10 5 times, and that would give me 1 times 2, 5 times 1. I still get to my 1/5. So what that tells me is that y is equal to 1/5. Question 6. 25 is equal to a over 5. That's not a coefficient in a variable, is it? Because that's not multiplication. That is what? Division, right? So I have to do what to get rid of the dividing by 5. I need the a by itself. Have to have an independent variable. Well, I'm going to have to multiply by 5. Since I'm dividing by 5, that would cancel those out. So then I would have to do it on the opposite side. Once my 5's cancel out, I'm going to come over here and multiply 25 by 5. And what does that give me? Well, I know I have a is equal to something when I cancel out my 5. And I end up with 25 times 5. And 5 quarters is equal to how much? Well, $1.25, right? So I know 125 is equal to a. If you had your answer as a is equal to 125, it's still correct. 1.3 is equal to c divided by 4. opposite function, I'm dividing by 4, so now I have to multiply by 4 to cancel that out. Then I do it on the opposite side, so now over here, I'm going to multiply by 4. Showing my work so I can get my credit. I multiply here by 4 to cancel it out and get C by itself. And then I go over here and multiply by 4. C is by itself. 1.3 times 4. Well, 4 times 1.3 is equal to 5.2. So I know 5 2/10 is what C is equal to. At the bottom of this paper then, I want you to do 8, 9, and 10. We're not going to worry about 11 and 12. We're just going to do 8, 9, and 10. I want you to work through them. Show your steps. Because when I show the steps then, you should be able to find any mistakes that you might have made if we don't get the same answers. Or you may find, I made a mistake. It does happen. 150 equals 6M. 14 7/10 is equal to B divided by 7. And 1/4 is equal to 3/5 times S. Pause the video, solve for them, show your work, unpause the video, and check your work. So I'm hoping you did indeed do as I asked, and you now have 3 answers, and I'm going to put each one up at a time. So on the first one, you should have said, well, I have to get M by itself, so I'm dividing by 6. That would cancel that out, and I do it on the opposite side, so I divide by 6. 150 goes inside the box because it's on the top of my fraction. 150 divided by 6, 6 goes in 150, 25 times. 6/4 does indeed make $1.50, so I know my math is correct, so I know M is equal to 25. Number 9, then we have 14.7 equals B divided by 7. You have to get B by itself. The only way I can get B by itself is by multiplying. That's the opposite function. When I multiply by the 7 then, that would cancel those out. And then I would do it on the opposite side. 7 times 14.7. You can stack them and multiply. Enter it into your handy dandy calculator. 14.7 times 7. You get 102.9. So I know B is 102 and 9/10. And then on 10, hopefully you got 5/12. 1/4 is equal to 3/5 times S. To get rid of 3/5, since I'm multiplying, I have to divide. Well, I can't divide. So I keep my first one. Division becomes multiplication. I flip my second fraction. That becomes 5/3. If I multiply those across, 15/15 makes 1. That lets me put S by itself. It just cancels out. On the opposite side, I end up with 5 times 1, 3 times 4. There's nothing I can cross reduce, so I just get 5/12. So 5/12 is equal to S. So this lesson is all about just taking the same steps that we have done now for the 6th video and applying it to multiplication and division. I do the opposite function on the opposite side. So if you put O and F, then an O and an S, those should help you remember what those steps are. If you have any questions, please come back and ask. If there's anything that you didn't get caught up with, you weren't paying attention, you got a little lost, a little daydreaming here and there, then rewind the video and watch it. I'm here to answer your questions if you do have them.